Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 298 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where, well, it was good to learn that my co-host is still alive.
Are you suggesting I caused you great pains in your march over Rohan?
Maybe.
Maybe. Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm Shaun Gunner, the Mayor of Delvin, and I'm here with the man of the West, the one and only, who I see has true elven blood in his veins, Alan Sisto.
Well, the beard suggests otherwise, but thank you, Shawn. Folks, join us as Legolas and Gimli are reunited with Merry and Pippin in the first of our 2 episodes on The Last Debate, the 9th chapter of Book 5 of The Return of the King.
And folks, some of you are hearing this podcast for the very first time, presumably because I'm here. And to you,
I love that.
We bid a very warm welcome. Here at the Prancing Pony podcast, we are reading, talking, speculating, and very often joking our way through Middle-earth a few pages at a time.
Or even insulting our co-host a few pages at a time, but thank you. We take a deep dive into the lore, we explore how the story came to be, we talk about our favorite themes, and really a whole lot more.
But in a light-hearted and fun way, like friends chatting at the pub. And we're glad that you have joined us.
And I'm sure you'll be glad you joined as well. But before we get to tonight's chapter discussion, it's time for me to have a chat with my co-host. Now, somehow he escaped this interview during his first run on the show back at the beginning of the season.
No, Alan. I think we're going to have to do something a bit different here. And
What?
I think it's time that someone interviewed you, Alan Sisto.
You are going off the notes, Shawn. Come on, man. Stay on target.
No. We're doing this, Alan. We are doing this.
Oh, man. All right. Fine.
So I know from the Tolkien events that I've been to and the people that I've met, the things I've read, that Tolkien has touched so many people's lives in incredibly profound ways. When you think about, I'm going to guess, from comments on Facebook or Barlaman's mailbag, what correspondence have you received that has meant the most to you?
Oh, my. Well, first of all, I had all these questions about Oxamute for you, Shawn. All right. I think the ones that have meant the most to me, honestly, are the ones that never make the they never make the show. And it's because they're messages about the impact that we've unknowingly had personally on people's lives. Hearing that we've helped people through difficult times, breakups, job losses, even the death of loved ones. And it's like, how in the world do we help with that? But somehow we have, and it's so encouraging. There are times where that feels like a weight, and I can't consciously think of that when I get in the booth. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to crack jokes and be irreverent and things like that. And yet it's that sort of lightness, I think, that sometimes really does help people who are struggling. So it's good to know. It's heartwarming. It's encouraging. I love being able to be a part of people's lives in that way. And yet it's something I have to set aside when I record. But those are the messages that mean the most. Knowing that the work, the hours and hours and untold hours that we've put into the show have really impacted people's lives individually and, for really good reasons. Those are the things that move me the most.
And that's incredibly powerful, and it's not just, I mean this in the nicest way, Alan, that's not just about you and Shawn or other co-hosts. That's about the power of Tolkien's works.
It is. No, it absolutely is. And I take very little credit for that. I really, all we're doing is shining a light on Tolkien's works. And if the way we shine that light helps people, great. That's why I try not to take it personally. Like, all I've done is present the professor's amazing words to you,
But that's still, and I feel this as chair of the Tolkien Society, right? That you feel like you're a custodian of this.
Oh, absolutely. There's a huge responsibility. Yeah.
It feels like a big responsibility, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And actually thinking about that, and I know I have this challenge because your engagement with Tolkien is now predominantly as a podcaster, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Do you still have time to enjoy Tolkien?
Oh, man.
I mean, do you enjoy Tolkien for your own pleasure and amusement away from the pressure of the podcast and away from your role as a custodian?
That is a tough question. I have to admit, probably not as much as I'd like, truth be told. Don't get me wrong. I love what I do, and it is not, I mean, sure, it has its challenges, certainly like right now where I'm trying to finish off the book and things like that. But yeah, I probably have not been able to read Tolkien for my own enjoyment as much as I used to because of the podcast, in terms of preparation. Like during the hiatus, I reread The Lord of the Rings, but it's always with an eye towards the next season. And so I'm trying to catch the themes that I need to string through to the next several episodes. I'll tell you what I do get to enjoy that I didn't enjoy before the podcast because I didn't really know or be involved in, and that's the Tolkien community. I do get to engage with them nearly every day, and that's something new for me over these last several years. I do still get to enjoy Tolkien from time to time. I've really enjoyed doing these readings that I do for Third Age Thursday and Silmarillion Saturday on today's Tolkien Times, as well as the appendices readings that I've been doing on the Prancing Pony Podcast TikTok channel. Those sort of are still very much for my pleasure and amusement because I get to choose the passages. And that's meant that I get to do the things that I want to do when I want to do them. But yeah, for the most part, it's one of those things where I'm like, all right, I can't wait to be done so that I can get back into reading Tolkien as a reader instead of as, like you said, a custodian, which is a really interesting word there. I definitely feel that responsibility. But please don't get me wrong. I love what I'm doing, and I wouldn't change a thing. So,
well, super. And you mentioned there about the fandom, and I think you and I both share that passion and admiration for the strength, the breadth, the vibrancy of Tolkien fandom. But that fandom is obviously shifting, and not just a consequence of more adaptations, but Tolkien is being politicized. We're seeing that a lot on both sides of the argument.
True.
Does that ever give you cause for concern?
Yeah, it does. It does give me some cause for concern. I'm not worried, though, because I believe in the fandom more than I believe in the fandoms of other properties. I'm involved in, whether it's Star Trek, Star Wars. Oh my goodness, Star Wars is kind of an awful fandom right now. Certain video games. There are all sorts of other fandoms that I'm sort of on the periphery of or involved in, and none of them compare to the Tolkien fandom in terms of the vast majority of people being reasonable people. Yeah, you're going to always have the outliers. You're always going to have, I'm not even going to name them because I don't want to, even give them the legitimacy of that. But you're always going to have some of those people on the fringes who try to leverage the fandom in a way that, polarizes and splits, because that's frankly what our society is doing as a whole, right? I mean, over the last 10, 15 years, it's not just the Tolkien fandom that has become politicized and polarized. It is the whole dang world. And, that polarization is seeing itself, kind of manifested in different fandoms in different areas where you would never expect to see that sort of conflict. So yeah, it does give me cause for concern, but ultimately I believe that the Tolkien fandom is stronger than those things and has a way of, self-healing, really. I think over time those people will fade away because they don't love Tolkien. They love controversy. They love their interpretation of Tolkien, not Tolkien himself, and certainly not his works themselves. So, yeah.
And on Tolkien's works, which passages make you laugh and which make you cry?
Oh, man. Oh, good question. The ones that make me laugh the most are actually the ones where I can play off them in really inappropriate ways. So that doesn't count because that's not Tolkien's humor that's making me laugh. That's my own terrible humor that makes me laugh.
So what you're saying, Alan, is you make yourself laugh.
I make myself laugh when I read Tolkien incorrectly. Yes. Changing a word here or there. Some of the things, and folks who, listen to the show regularly have heard those digressions where we just, wow, that's not what Tolkien meant, but man, that's funny. As for his actual words that make me laugh, I got to say Gandalf's snark often gets me laughing the most. He is just such a fun character. I love his playful banter, but at the same time, his willingness to really get in somebody's face. It's entertaining. It's fun. The antics of Merry and Pippin, of course, always make me laugh. I don't know if these count as passages, but Tolkien's letters often get me laughing out loud. That guy was a genius in writing these letters. He's just fantastic. And sometimes the stuff he has to say is just, it just gets me laughing. But that's not really part of Tolkien, I guess. I think, we're talking about his writings rather than, his fictional writings rather than his letters. In that case, I also have to say Farmer Giles of Ham gets me laughing every time. I think that shows a really brilliant sense of humor. Father Christmas letters. Crying is probably a lot more likely to happen, especially in the Legendarium. Passages that immediately come to mind are all in Lord of the Rings, things like Boromir's death, Sam at the Pass of Cirith Ungol after he thinks Frodo has died, and the choices he has to make. The Tears of Joy with Faramir and Eowyn. Oh, man, I cannot wait till next season when I get to that chapter. Or, of course, the Farewell at the Grey Havens, which I just read for Tolkien Reading Day and could not get through without crying. And that's just the Lord of the Rings. I mean, forget about things like Thorin's death or one of a million moments in the Silmarillion. I'm probably more often crying than laughing, but yeah, I have no complaints. He does such an amazing job with those poignant moments. Really does. Tears of joy at the ride of the Rohirrim when they arrive. My goodness, I cannot read that passage without tears just streaming down my face. It's just fantastic.
It is, and funnily enough, the Grey Havens was my very first reading at my very first in Yarlier.
Oh, setting the bar high there, sir.
I did.
Setting the bar high, yeah.
So I've got one last question.
Sure.
So if you were to give some advice to your former self about Tolkien or the podcast or the fandom, what would it be?
Oh, goodness. Those three are very different questions, aren't they? The advice that I would give to myself about Tolkien is what I give to people now, which is before you really want to dig in and dive into the Legendarium again, read on fairy stories and read Beowulf, Monsters and the Critics. Understand Tolkien is a man of dichotomy. Understand both the eucatastrophe and what he means by that, and also understand that sort of circle of light, last stand, long defeat sort of concept. Understand those things before you dive into the Legendarium again. Sure, read it casually the first time, but you want to get the most out of it, do that. That's one thing I would certainly give my advice to myself on Tolkien. We did on fairy stories to start, but we didn't do the Beowulf part, and I don't think we understood quite as much about that side of the dichotomy until we spoke with Verlin Flieger about that in season 3, I would guess. If I'm going to give myself advice about the podcast, that's a tough one because it really has gone well. I really wouldn't change a thing, except I would like to go back and have better production quality for season 1. I know people love the content. I don't want to change the content. It was fantastic. Shaun and I sort of getting to know each other, establishing that chemistry, and then, really diving into some of the most rich text in all of Tolkien right out of the gate in the Silmarillion. But I wish that we'd chosen a more high quality audio recording platform. We were using Skype, and then I was using an application on my Mac to blend his incoming channel, my channel, as well as I think I was using iTunes and just playing the music directly in iTunes, the theme that we used. And so I was pushing play and trying to adjust the volume manually. And then we would talk, and then I would adjust the volume down. And because it was all on one track, you couldn't edit anything unless you edited everything. So if there was a cough on my thing while Shaun was saying something important, too bad, it's in the show. If the crosstalk got a little confusing, I either had to cut all of it or cut none of it. Whereas now we can cut, the one person who kept interrupting, usually me, and leave the other one intact. And so I would say production values. That's probably the only advice I'd give to myself about the podcast. Fandom, just embrace the fandom up front. Be really community oriented. It's a tremendous group of people. At the same time, be ready that when you like something or are willing to like something, because I certainly after watching it ended up not liking Rings of Power all that much, but I was very optimistic about it when it came out and realized that that's going to draw some bitterness. I don't think I understood quite how bad that was going to be. I wasn't prepared for that. That's really probably the advice I'd give.
Oh, thank you very much for answering my questions.
Thank you, Shaun. Now I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get those questions to you, but that might have to wait for another season. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into the episode itself. Those are some great questions, Shaun. I really appreciate it. We are going to dive into chapter 9, the last debate, and I've got you reading directly from the start of the chapter.
The morning came after the day of battle, and it was fair with light clouds and the wind turning westward. Legolas and Gimli were early abroad, and they begged leave to go up into the city, for they were eager to see Merry and Pippin. "It is good to learn that they are still alive," said Gimli, "for they cost us great pains in our march over Rohan, and I would not have such pains all wasted." Together, the elf and the dwarf entered Minas Tirith, and folk that saw them pass marvelled to see such companions. For Legolas was fair of face, beyond the measure of men, and he sang an elven song in a clear voice as he walked in the morning. But Gimli stalked beside him, stroking his beard and staring around him. "There is some good stonework here," he said as he looked at the walls, "but also some that is less good, and the streets could be better contrived. When Aragorn comes into his own, I shall offer him the service of stone rights of the mountain, and we will make this a town to be proud of. They need more gardens, said Legolas. The houses are dead, and there is too little here that grows and is glad. If Aragorn comes into his own, the people of the wood shall bring him birds that sing, and trees that do not die.
I want to know about these immortal trees, by the way. That's pretty cool. But we'll go back to the beginning of the passage instead. The chapter opens with two characters that we haven't seen in such a long time, Legolas and Gimli. And it is now the day after the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. And since it's a different place in the story, we want to make sure we kind of clear up the timeline. It is March 16th. Or as you would say, 16 March.
The 16th of March.
Oh, you wouldn't say 16 March? You would say 16th of March? Okay.
16th of March.
All right, very good.
But on the 16th of March, they ask permission to go into the city because they want to see Merry and Pippin.
Of course.
But Gimli doesn't necessarily exude happiness about seeing them at this point because he's still rather bitter about chasing them over Rohan 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Now, maybe it's some dwarven humour.
I think so.
But it seems like he's simply just grateful that his trip wasn't wasted, as opposed to, happy to see his friends.
I love that. It does feel a little tongue-in-cheek, but it also feels very Gimli, like, it cost me a lot in my journeys, and I just want to make sure they're all right. Yeah. It's hard to believe that chase that Gimli's referring to was just 3 weeks ago. It feels like 3 years ago, because it was 3 years ago on the podcast, but yeah.
That's right, and it does feel like that's a repeated theme in this chapter of just how long it's been since they've seen each other, even though it's not been that long, but they have endured so much in that time.
Yeah, a little bit's been happening, huh? Yeah.
It has. So anyway, they head into the city, and they are a spectacle for the folk of Minas Tirith.
Of course they are, yeah.
And it's no wonder, because actually, in these days, in Minas Tirith, in Gondor, it's unlikely they would have seen too many elves or dwarves wandering around the city, and seeing two of them walking side by side must have been a shock. And it probably would have been a shock to both of them several months earlier that they'd been walking around Minas Tirith.
If you had told Legolas he was going to be walking into Minas Tirith with Gimli by his side, I think he would have looked at you really strangely. Yeah.
And particularly as we see that Legolas is described in very elvish terms, fair of face, and he sang an elven song in a clear voice.
Yep.
While Gimli is said to have stalked next to him, stroking his beard.
You can just kind of see him clomping along.
The only thing that I think is a bit of a shame is I rather would like to know what the song is that Legolas was singing.
I know. I would like to know that as well. So they each make their little comments about the city as they wander up to the Houses of Healing to find Merry and Pippin. I like these. These are worth kind of pointing out here.
Yeah, Gimli's focus is, not surprisingly for a dwarf, on the stones and on the construction. And he observed that's a mix of good and less good. And later on, he speculates that the good is probably the older stuff.
And I like that. We're gonna touch on that when we get to that passage as well. I like his bit about the way that the roads are built. Like, this could have been laid out better, and it makes me think he sort of missed his calling as a city planner or something.
He does, and he goes on to offer the service of his people to Aragorn. An interesting use of language in here, because Gimli says when Aragorn becomes king.
Yeah, when he comes into his own. Yep.
When he comes into his own.
Love that. That's a very good point. You're right. I mean, there's an assumption, presumption, belief, confidence that he's going to do that. I don't know if Gimli's aware that he really won't do that until they defeated Sauron. I think he's at this point, he's just assuming, well, Aragorn's here, so he's going to be king now,
Or perhaps he's just thinking, there's some work here that needs doing.
Yeah. We'd like the contract, by the way. Yeah. We'll give you a deal. We'll give you the old, Fellowship of the Ring discount, but it's only 10% off the invoice. So we're still going to make a profit.
To be fair, Alan, I think the ring was put in a brown envelope originally, wasn't it? So
that's a good point. Good point. So Legolas, on the other hand, is not thinking about the stonework, right? He's thinking about the lack of green space, which actually makes me think of him also being a city planner. These two should work together on SimCity and sort of make sure that the roads are laid out right and there's plenty of parks. I love it. But for him, it's a matter of joy, isn't it? Right? There isn't enough here that grows and is glad. I love it.
That's right. So he says that he would offer to Aragorn, if he comes into his own, his people to provide birds and trees, and apparently immortal ones at that. And that's why I say about Interesting difference in the language. Gimli was when, and Legolas was if.
Is if. Other than that, it's the exact same phrase. Aragorn comes into his own. That is a really interesting catch, Shawn. I did not notice that in putting this together.
And in fact, I was wondering, is that because of their different perspectives on time?
Yeah, that's almost exactly that. It also be more of a knowledge thing, right? I mean, I think Legolas understands the significance of trying to take down Sauron. Aragorn isn't going to be king unless that happens, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, the other thing I thought that was quite interesting here, neither of them acknowledged that the city had just been bombed.
That's a good point. There's good stonework here, except for the big holes where the bombs have dropped. Yeah.
But also, there's a sense for me, a detachment from men. Gimli talks about the stonework. Legolas talks about the plants. But actually, we're told that people in the streets are watching them, but they don't reference the people.
No, they don't. Closest we get is Legolas pointing out that the houses are dead.
Yeah.
That's really about it. That's a good point. They're speaking more about the city than the people that live there. Yeah.
Which makes me feel like, is this a hint that they are here for the quest, their loyalty to the Fellowship and ensuring that the ring is destroyed, and for their desire to protect their own people? Because actually, it doesn't feel like, they're not saying anything about the residents of Minas Tirith, are they, at all?
No, they're not.
Which I was surprised by when I read it through.
Yeah.
And clocked that. I thought it's interesting that neither of them have made a comment about the people. Not even like, these people need help.
Right.
Or these people need a king.
Aha. We will see Legolas make some comments about a person in the next reading, but we'll get to that after the break. Now, before we get back to the text, and not one but two sidebars related to Prince Imrahil, we want to make sure you know that even after you've listened to the episode, there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
The PPP has an amazing listener community. You are, always coming up with great questions and discussions across all of our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
That's right. Now on Facebook, you just want to look for the Prancing Pony Podcast. Pretty straightforward. Follow the page, get the news and the episodes, but you want to be sure to join the group to get involved in some great discussions.
That's right. If you prefer Reddit, you can find us at r/PrancingPonyPod. On Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, we are simply at Prancing Pony Pod.
That's right. And finally, folks, my all-new daily podcast, Today's Tolkien Times, has been live for a while now. It is a short-format show available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, also available in video form on YouTube. Each weekday features something different, from Third Age Thursdays to Silmarillion Saturdays. So join me on this new adventure. Please visit TolkienTimes.com and follow at Tolkien Times on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And folks, if you enjoy the PPP, please consider supporting the show by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. When you do, you really do get a lot. You get an active Discord community that includes live episode recordings. We're doing that right now with 40, 50 people listening in live as we do this. You also get episode postscripts, episodes without digital ads, and a whole lot more.
Like free merch. Who doesn't love free merch? And live Discord hangouts. But you can also become a part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes, or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please do go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and join the Fellowship of the Podcast.
Now, of course, you can also help us out by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and a rating over on Spotify. And please recommend us to your friends. That's how we grow.
It is indeed. But for now, though, let's get back to that text.
All right. At length, they came to the Prince Imrahil, and Legolas looked at him and bowed low, for he saw that here indeed was one who had elven blood in his veins. "Hail, Lord," he said. "It is long since the people of Nimrodel left the woodlands of Lorien, and yet still one may see that not all sailed from Amroth's haven west over water." "So it is said in the lore of my land," said the prince, "yet never has one of the fair folk been seen there for years beyond count. And I marvel to see one here now, in the midst of sorrow and war. What do you seek?" I am one of the 9 companions who set out with Mithrandir from Meladris, said Legolas. And with this dwarf, my friend, I came with the Lord Aragorn. But now we wish to see our friends, Meriadoc and Peregrine, who are in your keeping, we are told. You will find them in the houses of healing, and I will lead you thither, said Imrahil. It will be enough if you send one to guide us, Lord, said Legolas. For Aragorn sends this message to you. He does not wish to enter the city again at this time. Yet there is need for the captains to hold council at once, and he prays that you and Eomer of Rohan will come down to his tents as soon as may be. Mithrandir is already there. We will come, said Imrahil, and they parted with courteous words. That is a fair lord and a great captain of men, said Legolas. If Gondor has such men still in these days of fading, great must have been its glory in the days of its rising. And we'll stop there.
Great indeed. But as they make their way up the city streets, they encounter Prince Imrahil.
Yes.
And Legolas has some thoughts about Prince Imrahil.
He sure does, doesn't he?
He does. He immediately recognises him as someone perhaps with some elven blood.
Uh-huh.
We're going to get onto that one in a second.
Yeah. Now, he also comments about Nimrodel and Lorien and the Haven of Amroth, and that means it's as good a time as any for a couple of brief, I said brief, they're not going to be that brief, sidebars. Sidebar number 1, first let's talk a little bit about Nimrodel and why she went from Lorien to Amroth. Now, I know we covered this on the PPP, but way, way back ago, it's been several years, and it's also very, very relevant to Imrahil, so it's very much worth recapping.
Yeah, so let's set that stage. Amdir was the king of Lorien in the Second Age. He and most of his army died in the Battle of Dagorlad in the Second Age, 34-34. And that was when his son, Amroth, became king of Lorien. Amroth had been around for some time prior to that, though. In Aldarion and Erendis, we read that Aldarion went to the country of Amroth, where the Nandor elves still dwell in the Second Age, 730.
See, we're not actually given a date of birth for Amroth, so we know that he certainly had been around long enough that the place was called the country of Amroth, even though his father Amdir was still king in Second Age 730. But all the way forward then in Second Age 1697, well before he became king, 1700 years before he became king, he helped Elrond in the war against Sauron. After the death of Celebrimbor, we read that Elrond would indeed have been overwhelmed had not Sauron's host been attacked in the rear. For Durin sent out a force of dwarves from Khazad-dûm, and with them came elves of Lorinand, led by Amroth. Now, this is from the history of Galadriel and Celeborn, and actually nearly all of what we're going to read in these sidebars comes from that.
So reading here from Unfinished Tales. For long years he had loved her, and taken no wife, since she would not wed him. She loved him indeed, for he was beautiful, even for one of the Eldar, and valiant and wise. But she was of the Sylvan elves, and regretted the incoming of the elves from the west, who, as she said, brought wars and destroyed the peace of old. And she wouldn't even speak Sindarin.
No.
She lived alone by the river, spoiler, Nimrodel, named for her, obviously.
Of course.
But then, in the Third Age, 1981, when the dwarves woke Durin's bane, she headed south, while Amroth followed her and found her on the edge of Fangorn.
And there on the borders of Fangorn, charming place, they had a little chat about their future. Amroth and Nimrodel held a long debate, and at the last they plighted their troth. To this I will be true, she said, and we shall be wedded when you bring me to a land of peace. Amroth vowed that for her sake he would leave his people even in the time of need, and with her seek for such a land. But there is none now in Middle-earth, he said, and will not be for the elven folk ever again. We must seek for a passage over the great sea to the ancient west. Then he told her of the haven in the south, where many of his own people had come long ago. They are now diminished, for most have set sail into the west, but the remnant of them still build ships and offer passage to any of their kin that come to them, weary of Middle-earth. It is said that the grace that the Valar gave to us to pass over the sea is granted also now to any of those who made the great journey, even if they did not come in ages past to the shores, and have not yet beheld the blessed land. Oh, man. Love that. Absolutely.
Lovely passage. So they headed south, and eventually they were separated.
Yeah.
So Amroth looked and looked, but then went to the Elf Haven, where the place was virtually abandoned, one ship, and just a handful of elves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we read that they welcomed Amroth, but they were unwilling to await Nimrodel, whose coming seemed to them now beyond hope.
Mm.
And those elves wanted to head west, which is what elves want
That's
to
what
do.
elves do.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
So the year is drawing to a close. It's autumn. Storms are coming.
Yep.
But these elves waited for Nimrodel anyway. So great was the grief of Amroth, we are told.
Yeah, that's right.
So that they were living on the ship, ready to go, when disaster struck.
Great, I get to read the disaster. All right. There came a great night of storm, one of the fiercest in the annals of Gondor. It came from the cold northern waste and roared down through Eriador into the lands of Gondor, doing great havoc. The White Mountains were no shield against it, and many of the ships of men were swept out into the bay of Belfalas and lost. The light elven ship was torn from its moorings and driven into the wild waters towards the coasts of Umbar. No tidings of it were ever heard in Middle-earth. But the elven ships made for this journey did not founder, and doubtless it left the circles of the world and came at last to Eressëa. But it did not bring Amroth thither. The storm fell upon the coasts of Gondor just as dawn was peering through the flying clouds. But when Amroth woke, the ship was already far from land. Crying aloud in despair, "Nimrodel!" he leapt into the sea and swam towards the fading shore. The mariners, with their elvish sight, for a long time could see him battling with the waves, until the rising sun gleamed through the clouds and far off lit his bright hair like a spark of gold. No eyes of elves or men ever saw him again in Middle-earth. Of what befell Nimrodel, nothing is said here, though there were many legends concerning her fate.
What a powerful passage.
You asked me earlier what passages make me cry. That's certainly one of them. Wow, man, that is powerful stuff right there.
And particularly the description of his hair, I thought really stood out to me.
I know, so visual. Is there a piece of art on that? Because there should be. What a gorgeous but also tragic shot that would be, right?
Brilliant, yeah. I was imagining it exactly in my head.
Yeah.
So, Dol Amroth, the hill of Amroth, was named after him, and the promontory would eventually be ruled as a hereditary princedom by the princes of Dol Amroth. Thus concludes our first sidebar of the chapter. Have we got a little music for concludes our first sidebar of the chapter?
I don't know. Ba-ba. There you go. There's your music. Maybe we need to come up with some sidebar music in the hiatus before each season. However, here's the thing. Normally we go back from a sidebar into the text, but not this time. We go straight into another sidebar, and it's the one on Imrahil.
It's almost like sidebar inception, this.
I like that. I like that a lot. So the question specifically here is, how did Legolas recognize the elven strain in Imrahil? And how did that elven strain get to be there in the first place? And that's how this kind of connects back to Nimrodel. So for the first question, the part about how Legolas recognized the elven strain, I'm going to go to Nature of Middle-earth and look at a chapter simply titled, maybe one of my favorite chapter titles in all of Tolkien, Beards. That's the name of the chapter, just Beards. Now, the bits that we're going to read are all found in that chapter, but some were quoted or summarized by Christopher Tolkien in Unfinished Tales, so you might get some pieces from that as well.
That's right. This text was found among what Christopher Tolkien called the last writings, and are dated to 1972 to 1973, so literally the last 18 months of Tolkien's life. And this note is, in Tolkien's words, an account of beards and the fact that the elvish race has no beards, so that this also became a mark of an elvish strain in certain kingly families of Númenórean descent.
There you go.
Spoilers, I guess, because there's the answer.
Yep, but it wouldn't be the PPP if we left it there, right, Shawn?
I thought we were going back to the text.
Not yet. So Tolkien writes in discussing an answer that he had sent to a reader, quote, that I myself imagined Aragorn, Denethor, Imrahil, Boromir, Faramir as beardless. This, I said, I supposed not to be due to any custom of shaving, but a racial characteristic. None of the Eldar had any beards, and this was a general racial characteristic of all elves in my world. End quote. Well, except for those in the third life cycle, apparently, because Círdan the shipwright is described very tall he was, and his beard was long, but he is very much the exception.
He is. Tolkien goes on, though. I mean that in a nice way.
He always goes on. I'm glad he does. I wish he would have gone on longer. Yeah.
I think we all would have done. He says, any element of an elvish strain in human ancestry was very dominant and lasting, receding only slowly, as might be seen in Númenóreans of royal descent, in the matter of longevity also. Yeah. The tribes of men from whom the Númenóreans were descended were normal, and hence the majority of them would have beards. But the royal house was half-elven, having two strains of elvish race in their ancestry, through Luthien of Doriath, royal Sindarin, and Idril of Gondolin, royal Noldorin. The effects were long-lasting, e.g. in a tendency to a stature a little above the average, to a greater, though steadily decreasing, longevity, and probably most lastingly in beardlessness. Thus, none of the Númenórean chieftains of descent from Elros, whether kings or not, would be bearded, and it is stated that Elendil was descended from Silmarillion, a royal princess, hence Aragorn and all his ancestors were also beardless.
Correct. Now, Tolkien goes on to explain about Denethor and his line, but then he adds this. In the case of Faramir and Boromir, another strain appears. Their mother was Finduilas, another Silmarillion name, Tolkien explains, daughter of Adrahil of Dol Amroth, and sister of Prince Imrahil. But this line had also a special elvish strain according to its own legends, as clearly noted in the text. As Legolas's mention of Nimrodel shows, there was an ancient elvish port near Dol Amroth, and a small settlement of Sylvan elves there from Lorien. The legend of the prince's line was that one of their earliest fathers had wedded an elf maiden. In some legends, it was indeed, evidently improbable, to have been Nimrodel herself, or probably in other tales, it was one of Nimrodel's companions, who was lost in the upper mountain glens. In any case, I do not imagine Imrahil as bearded.
And there you have it. Imrahil has a special elvish strain, not from Nimrodel herself, who had pledged her troth to Amroth, but from one of her companions, and he's beardless, just like all those others.
That's right. So what do we know about this companion of hers? Well, we know the legend at least, and that's good enough, because we always take the some say as being truth. So this is truth. According to the same traditions, Galador, and that's the first prince of Dol Amroth, was the son of Imrazor the Númenórean, who dwelt in Belfalas, and the elven lady Mithrellas. She was one of the companions of Nimrodel among many of the elves that fled to the coast about the year 1980 of the Third Age, when evil arose in Moria. And Nimrodel and her maidens strayed in the wooded hills and were lost. But in this tale it is said that Imrazor harbored Mithrellas and took her to wife. But when she had borne him a son, Galador, and a daughter, Gilmith, she slipped away by night, and he saw her no more. But though Mithrellas was of the lesser Sylvan race, and not of the high elves or the grey, it was ever held that the house and kin of the lords of Dol Amroth was noble by blood, as they were fair in face and mind.
And that fair, beardless face is what helped Legolas recognise the elvish strain in Imrahil.
That's right.
Although, of course, they could all be wrong, and it could be that he just got a razor.
I suppose. He's one of the only guys who actually says, I want to look royal, so I'm going to shave my beard every day.
But anyway, back to the text. We learn that Imrahil, beardless, knows this legend, but hasn't seen an elf there in years beyond count.
That's
and
right.
is, in fact, quite surprised to see Legolas here, particularly in the middle of war. Yeah. He asks him what he's looking for, and gets a brief intro before the answer.
He does. Legolas explains that he and Gimli, who remains nameless, but I love this, my friend, this dwarf, my friend, I absolutely love that line, that they're two of the 9 companions that left Rivendell with Gandalf and that they came here with Aragorn. So, I mean, he's name-dropping everybody. But never mind all that, Mr. Prince Guy. We're looking for Meriadoc and Peregrine. Why so formal, Legolas? I just want to know. What's up, Leggy? Merry and Pippin, man, who we have been led to understand are here somewhere.
That's right. So Imrahil says that he will personally take them to where they are, which is in the Houses of Healing.
Nice offer, yeah.
It's a very nice offer, considering he's now, running the city, or was about to run the city.
Pretty much, yeah.
But Legolas passes and asks for someone else to guide them there because Imrahil is needed elsewhere.
That's right.
Aragorn has asked for Imrahil and Éomer to head down and join him and Gandalf. And Imrahil, who we will see later, views Aragorn as his king, and of course, immediately agrees.
Yeah, I love that, and I can't wait to get to that moment. That's in the next episode, right? The second half of the chapter. But he's like, he is my liege lord, whether he claims to be or no. One of my favorite moments. Can't wait till we get there. But obviously, I can't wait because I just said it. So Legolas observes Imrahil's nature, right, and he notes, man, if Imrahil represents Gondor at its nadir, right, at its lowest point, it must have been filled with glory when it was strong. This is a guy, man. This dude is something. Yeah.
And again, it speaks to the point that Gimli mentioned earlier about the stonework, how good that was back in the day.
Yeah.
So there is that sense already that this was once a great city.
Yeah.
Little subtext here. Maybe it can be again. If only we had the right leader.
If only we had a proper king, because we have been under the rule of the stewards for 1,000 years now. That is true. And even really the last couple of kings, let's be fair. Well, the last king in particular was not the brightest guy. I mean, going off to single combat with the Witch King when you don't have any heirs left is probably an unwise choice. But anyway, we digress.
Get these treasonous thoughts out of your head, Alan Sisto. Speaking against the kings like that.
He needs an heir and a spare, and then he goes off to prove his manhood against the Witch King. I'll stand by my words. So Gimli's point here really is a very different perspective than what we're used to. It's a very medieval, very pre-modern viewpoint. This idea, we live in a world now where we're constantly thinking about progress, right? Things always get better. Things are better now than they were 50 years ago. That's true of dental care. I'm not sure how much that's true of everything else, but we'll see. But for a medievalist like Tolkien, he looks back to see when it was better, right? And we see it in things like the eldest work, right? This idea about the old work of giants, work that could not possibly be replicated today because nobody knows how to do it. Nobody has the skill set to do it. It's a very different perspective than what we have in our modern world.
It is, and he expresses this with a poetic twist. A frost in spring or a blight in summer, they eventually don't live up to their potential. They start well, but cannot finish.
It's interesting to hear that sort of poetic flourish from Gimli, isn't it?
It is, and interesting to have that direct comparison between what he sees as the dwarves and men as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like him making a difference between... We often hear elves talk about the differences between them and men. That's very common, about death, longevity. Right. But we don't often hear dwarves talk about the differences between them and men. And it's an interesting little thing that actually his judgment is almost dwarves get things done, men perhaps don't.
Yeah.
But Legolas, he's different as well. Being an immortal, serial, longeval elf, he takes that long view.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Sure, they might not always live up to their potential, but they don't give up. They just keep coming.
Yep. They don't just have the one start and a failure to live to potential. They have many starts because they have generations and generations and generations, right? They keep going as a race. They're like cockroaches.
Cockroaches?
They're like rats or something.
That's how Tolkien describes them, isn't it? Men, they're like cockroaches.
Men, they're like cockroaches. Well, look at all the names the elves came up with for men, right?
The Prancing Pony podcast. Men are like cockroaches.
There's our title. I almost said rats. That works too, but you get the idea. We scatter when the lights come on, though. Anyway, wrapping it up with the observation, by the way, that Legolas does, that men's works are going to outlast both the works of elves and dwarves, which has got to be hard for Gimli to imagine. I mean, we just walked through Moria not too many months back, and, that's still very much present, even if nobody's living there. So Gimli, understandably, is a bit skeptical. I love Legolas, though. He gives that very typical elvish non-committal response. To that, the elves know not the answer. Don't come to elves to actually ask legitimate questions because they're not going to give you solid answers. But that does it for that section. And Shawn, I'm going to have you pick up right after that.
With that, the servant of the prince came and led them to the houses of healing. And there they found their friends in the garden. and their meeting was a merry one. For a while they walked and talked, rejoicing for a brief space in peace and rest under the morning high up in the windy circles of the city. Then, when Merry became weary, they went and sat upon the wall with the greensward of the houses of healing behind them, and away southward before them was the Anduin glittering in the sun as it flowed away, out of the sight even of Legolas, into the wide flats and green haze of the Lebanon and South Ithilien. And now Legolas fell silent, while the others talked, and he looked out against the sun, and as he gazed he saw white seabirds beating up the river. "Look!" he cried. "Gulls! They are flying far inland. A wonder they are to me, and a trouble to my heart. Never in all my life had I met them, until we came to Pelargir, and there I heard them crying in the air as we rode to the battle of the ships. Then I stood still, forgetting war in Middle-earth, for their wailing voices spoke to me of the sea. The sea, alas, I have not yet beheld it, but deep in the hearts of all my kindred lies the sea longing, which it is perilous to stir. Alas for the gulls! No peace shall I have again under beech or under elm." "Say not so," said Gimli. "There are countless things still to see in Middle-earth, and great works to do. But if all the fair folk take to the havens, it will be a duller world for those who are doomed to stay."
And indeed it would be. We'll have to skip the next paragraphs, but we will talk about them. Going back to the beginning of that passage, their meeting was a merry one. This is so neat, seeing Legolas and Gimli reunited with Merry and Pippin. We talked about this. Yeah, it's been 3 weeks since the chase. And yet, it really actually hasn't been all that long, right? I mean, the last time the four of these folks were together was the 5th of March, which was 11 days ago. And that's the night that Gandalf and Pippin headed off to Minas Tirith.
That's right. But Merry got one more day with the three hunters until they headed off to the paths of the dead, leaving Merry with Theoden and the Rohirrim. But a lot has happened in those 10 to 11 days. And although, to be fair, it was a long time since this podcast covered that section of the book. So I can definitely understand why 11 days felt such a long time ago.
So much has happened too, but yeah, you're right. For me, podcast time is, and it's why when we do these switches between the books too, right? We spend a whole season covering Frodo and Sam, and you're like, wow, it's been a long time since we've seen these guys. I would have actually loved to have heard more of this conversation, but I get it. So as they visit and catch up, Merry gets tired. Remember, he is still wounded, right? He's still recovering. Wounded's the wrong word. He's still ill, I guess, still certainly feeling the ill effects, recovering from the Black Shadow after having stabbed the Witch King. So they go and sit on the wall now instead of walking around while he rests. I love the way they kind of take that into consideration. And then they're looking south to the Anduin as it heads down to Lebanon, beyond even what your elf eyes see, Legolas. I love that.
Beyond indeed. On the bit about Merry, just to note, obviously you covered this in the previous chapter.
Right.
But it ends with the conclusion how hardy the hobbits are, right? You think
yes.
Éowyn and Faramir are at the moment. They're still in the house.
Oh, yeah, they're still recovering.
They've got to spend 2 weeks there. And yet Merry's already wandering around the walls of the city.
Yeah.
Again, an obvious statement by Tolkien about the hardiness of hobbits.
Toughen the fiber, I deem. Yes.
Toughen the fiber, that's it. But Legolas, even though it's beyond his eyes, he gets quite quiet, quite pensive, sees the seagulls.
Yep.
And this takes him back to the 3 days ago. I think is that what, a year in podcast? No, not a year.
Just
in podcast.
about. Sure feels like it.
It takes him back 3 days to Pelargir, and he relates that experience.
Yeah.
But not the experience of the battle. It's the experience of the gulls.
That's right.
Hearing their cry, it says he stopped, forgot about the war completely. Because that sea awakening in him. So he's not even seen the sea. He says that. He's not even seen it. No. But he knows how dangerous it is to wake up that desire for the sea.
It sure is, yeah.
And this is a woodland elf. But now he thinks he won't have peace again under beech or under elm. The sea will call to him, leaving him with this longing to leave Middle-earth. And it's funny, for him, he's a woodland elf, saying that now he can never have peace again under beech or under elm. For me, it's a bit ironic, because whenever I hear seagulls, I also want to leave.
Mine. That's a very good point. Yeah, no, you're right. And then it's interesting. I think it's neat to see that it's Gimli, not the hobbits, who is the first to object to Legolas's, potential leaving, right? There are so many things to see and do. Don't you leave yet.
And not just you, but all elves. If you all leave, the world is duller.
I think he specifically means Galadriel, but that's just my personal guess. I mean, we know how Gimli feels. Can we linger here a moment, though? Recognize the truth in what he's saying and how amazing it is that it's a dwarf who is saying it. I mean, I think Tolkien wants us to think, now that we're in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th age, that the world is a duller place because the elves have left, right? The world is less fairy because the elves have all gone, or almost all gone, I suppose, and the ones that have left are faded and basically gone. But the fact that it's Gimli that says this, right? Isn't that really just, breathtaking to me?
It is remarkable, because we know, at this point in the story, we know that Gimli has got a fondness for Galadriel, and we know he's got a fondness for Legolas, but he still hasn't really exhibited a wider appreciation of all elves. That still hasn't really happened. Particularly in Lothlorien, he definitely wasn't a fan of the other elves, right? He was a fan of Galadriel, but the others, he was
a bit taken by her, but he could have done without Celeborn.
Right, so for him to say at this point that actually the entire world would be duller if the elves were not in it.
The world would suffer if you were gone. Yeah.
It shows the maturity of Gimli on this journey. We often talk about how the characters change as a result of the journey. This is one from Gimli. It's not just that he appreciates Legolas, but it's a greater appreciation of all elves.
Man, that's a good point. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the characters do grow, and yet sometimes I don't think we look at Legolas and Gimli as growing very much outside of necessarily their friendship, obviously, which is the big element of growth. But yeah, this is a moment here for Gimli to show an appreciation, understanding of the value of the elves as a whole. And it's subtle, quick, but a really neat moment.
Well, I also think with Gimli, we didn't touch on it earlier, but I might mention it now, which is him saying when they got to Minas Tirith, he will offer the skills of the mountain to come and help Minas Tirith.
Yeah.
When was the last time dwarves did that? For men?
For men? Yeah.
Because actually, the last time dwarves and men had a partnership, as it were, was probably in Erebor and
Lake Town, right. Yeah.
Both sides weren't that happy with the conclusion of that the previous time around.
Fair.
So again, interesting, Gimli appreciating men, feeling like his people can help the city.
Yeah.
That might just be showing off about their stonecraft, but nonetheless, still an element of, actually, I want to work together on this.
Yeah.
But it isn't just Gimli objecting to Legolas and the elves leaving. Because in the part that we've skipped, Merry objects as well, telling Legolas that folks need them, hobbits and dwarves.
That's right.
But also, Merry still sounds perhaps a little bit like he's under the influence of the Black Shadow, saying that he feels like the war is going to get worse.
Yeah, the worst of this war is still to come. That's a good point.
But someone who's not so much under the influence, Pippin, still here to cheer us all up.
Yeah.
He's like, come on, cheer up, get up.
That's right.
The sun is out. And he references the strange journey, which clearly off camera has been mentioned and seems to be asking for a little more information about it.
That's right. I do like that he says that, right? You and Legolas have mentioned your strange journey with Strider about a dozen times. Not what we've read. Hasn't happened in our text, but yeah. And he does want to know more, doesn't he? So why don't I go ahead and read him more? I'll let him know. The sun may shine here, said Gimli, but there are memories of that road that I do not wish to recall out of the darkness. Had I known what was before me, I think that not for any friendship would I have taken the paths of the dead. The paths of the dead, said Pippin. I heard Aragorn say that, and I wondered what he could mean. Won't you tell us some more? Not willingly, said Gimli. "For upon that road I was put to shame. Gimli, Glóin's son, who had deemed himself more tough than men, and hardier under earth than any elf. But neither did I prove, and I was held to the road, only by the will of Aragorn." "And by the love of him also," said Legolas. "For all those who come to know him come to love him after their own fashion, even the cold maiden of the Rohirrim. It was at early morn of the day ere you came there, Merry, that we left Dunharrow. Such a fear was on all the folk that none would look on our going, save the Lady Éowyn, who lies now hurt in the house below. There was grief at that parting, and I was grieved to behold it." "Alas, I had heart only for myself," said Gimli. "Nay, I will not speak of that journey." He fell silent, but Pippin and Merry were so eager for news that at last Legolas said, "I will tell you enough for your peace, for I felt not the horror, and I feared not the shadows of men, powerless and frail as I deemed them." Swiftly then he told of the haunted road under the mountains, and the dark tryst at Erech, and the great ride thence, 90 leagues and 3 to Pelargir on Anduin. "4 days and nights, and on into a 5th we rode from the Black Stone," he said. "And lo, in the darkness of Mordor my hope rose, for in that gloom the shadow host seemed to grow stronger, and more terrible to look upon. Some I saw riding, some striding, yet all moving with the same great speed. Silent they were, but there was a gleam in their eyes. In the uplands of Lamadon they overtook our horses and swept round us, and would have passed us by if Aragorn had not forbidden them. At his command they fell back. Even the shades of men are obedient to his will, I thought. They may serve his needs yet." They may.
They may.
All right.
But Gimli wants nothing to do with it.
No.
Going back to the beginning, saying that he would not have taken the road, even for friendship of Legolas and Aragorn, had he had known.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is an interesting change, by the way, from the early draft. It was actually kind of flipped, a very different conversation. "It would be a long story fully told," said Legolas, "and there are memories of that road that I do not wish to recall. Never again will I venture on the paths of the dead, not for any friendship, and but for my promise to Gimli, I would vow never go into the White Mountains again." And then it's Gimli, actually, in this early draft, who's the braver one. He says, "Well, for my part," said Gimli, "the fear is past, and only wonder remains. Yet it cannot be denied that it is a dreadful road." And then, of course, speaking of a dreadful road, Legolas names them here for the very first time, and that is what prompts Pippin to ask for more information.
So not only would Gimli skip the paths of the dead if he had the chance, he would skip even talking about them.
Yeah.
And it's because he feels ashamed. He thought that he was tougher and hardier than elves and men, but he couldn't do it. It was only Aragorn's will that carried him through. His friendship with Aragorn and Aragorn's will that made him get through it. Any other scenario, he wouldn't have done it.
No, absolutely. Legolas gently adds, I love this, it's not really, hey, let me correct you. It's more like, let me add on to that, right? It is Aragorn's will, but it's also your love for Aragorn. Everybody who knows Aragorn, who gets to know him, ends up loving him, one way or another in their own individual way. And then he casually name drops, without actually naming her, Éowyn. And that begins the retelling of the story, which goes back to the time that they left Dunharrow. And now we know why he sort of inferred about Éowyn, right? She was the only one brave enough to even look at them as they left. And what a moment that is, that there was grief at that parting, and I grieved to watch it. It must have been painful to see that hurt, that heartbreak for Éowyn.
But Gimli doubles down. Nope, I'm not talking about it.
That's right. I'm still not talking about it. Nope.
But Legolas he continues telling the hobbits enough for their peace.
Yeah.
And thus begins the flashback of events that began in the chapter of the passing of the Grey Company.
That's right. Now, the telling of this part of the story was always a challenge for Tolkien, and he really did struggle with it. A look at the War of the Ring, the 8th volume of History of Middle-earth, really reveals that.
But so does letter 199. In 1957, he wrote a letter to Caroline Everett, who, based on the opening of the letter, had chosen to do her thesis on Tolkien. And his comments at the beginning of the letter are fantastic. Do go read it.
Yeah, definitely. Even aside from the stuff that's relevant here, that his response, it's good. It's worth reading. The part of that letter, though, that is relevant to this section is this. Tolkien explains a bit about the process of writing The Lord of the Rings, and he says the story unfolded itself as it were, and that resolving the loose ends was done, quote, by constant rewriting backwards. You talk about keeping track of the calendar and the timeline. And of course, we know because we now have the timeline in our possession, thanks to that supplement to Tolkien studies, that he very much did this. Yeah.
Then he admitted that it was writing The Return of the King that was naturally the most difficult, since by the time I had accumulated a large number of narrative debts and set some awkward problems of presentation in drawing together the separated threads. But the problem was not so much what happened, about which I was only occasionally in doubt, though praised for invention. I have not, in fact, any conscious memory of sitting down and deliberately thinking out any episode as how to order the account of it. The solution is imperfect, inevitably.
I love that. That whole aside, by the way, of Tolkien's there, that hey, the plot points aren't really the problem. I only very rarely had doubt about those. Even though I was praised for inventing all this, I don't remember sitting down and thinking out any of these things. They just sort of came to me. Oh, man.
And interestingly, that not only does he not remember writing them down, but then he then says, I created awkward problems for myself.
Yeah,
and an interesting phrase, narrative debts.
I love that. The large number of narrative
phrase.
debts. He has kind of backed himself into a corner in a number of these things. Yeah, he really has. So his whole point, though, of course, here is that the challenge for him is how to order the account of it. It's not what happened, it's how to tell it. And he goes on to explain the biggest problem here was how to, quote, bring up Aragorn unexpectedly to the raising of the siege, and yet inform readers of what he'd been up to. Told in full in its proper place, the passing of the Grey Company, though it would have been better for the episode, it would have destroyed Chapter 6, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Of course, it would have taken away the catastrophe. Going back to Tolkien, he says, told in full, or indeed in part, in retrospect, it would be out of date and hold up the action, as it does in Chapter 9 here. The solution, imperfect, was to cut down the whole episode, which in full would belong rather to a saga of Aragorn, Arathorn's son, than to my story, and tell the ending of it briefly during the inevitable pause after the Battle of the Pelennor. Now, I don't know about you, but I would buy that saga of Aragorn, Arathorn's son right now. I'd like to pre-order that, please.
Let's write to HarperCollins, get them on it.
Seriously. Saga of Aragorn, Arathorn's son, deluxe edition next year.
In all good bookshops.
And even mediocre bookshops, yes.
Mediocre one. So going back to the main text, Legolas swiftly tells them about the paths of the dead. In fact, so swiftly, we don't even get to hear it.
I know. Swiftly, he told them of the mountains and the dark tryst and the great right hands. Boom, we're done. All right.
But he also tells them about the meeting at the Stone of Eric and the long ride to Pelargir.
And it was a long ride indeed. For reference, 93 leagues is 279 miles, or about roughly 450 kilometers. To have ridden that over a little more than 4 days is a huge accomplishment, especially when you consider you got an army of the dead at your back.
Got to feel sorry for the horses doing that one.
Seriously, it's brutal. Yeah.
Brutal. But we also see the darkness from Mordor once again come back to bite Sauron.
I love that.
Recall how it helped the Rohirrim in their approach to Minas Tirith. Here, it helps strengthen the Shadow Host.
Yes, it does. In fact, they got so hyped, they started to pass Aragorn, but he stopped them, which really impressed Legolas. Like, woo, man, they listened to him.
Yeah, and in the part that we skipped, we get a run-through of those first 3 days of riding. First, 1 day of light.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be the 9th of March, the day before the Dawnless Day. We read about this at the time, though. They passed Tarlang's Neck and came into Lamadon, until they came to Kelembel upon Kirill, and the sun went down like blood behind Pinath Gelin, away in the west behind them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Then, the second day, the day without dawn, where they crossed Kirill and Ringlow. So that would be the 10th of March, right?
Right, exactly. And the next day was the third day that Legolas references here, when they got to Linhir, where they encountered a fight between the men of Lamadon and some of the Haradrim and people of Umbar. That's the 11th of March. Not surprisingly, both sides cleared the field when the dead guys showed up, except for their Lord Angbor, who was instructed to get his people together and follow. And I'll tell you what, we want to do a sidebar on Gilrine, the name of the second river that sounds awfully familiar, but we're going to go ahead and do that in the P5. So folks, if you are a member of the Fellowship of the Podcast, please be sure to tune into the postscript for more on Gilrine. In the meantime, though, Shawn, let me go ahead and have you pick up with the next reading.
Thus we crossed over Gilrine, driving the allies of Mordor in rout before us, and then we rested a while. But soon Aragorn arose, saying, Lo! Already Minas Tirith is assailed. I fear that it will fall ere we come to its aid. So we mounted again before night had passed and went on with all the speed that our horses could endure over the plains of Lebanon. Legolas paused and sighed, and turning his eyes southward, softly he sang. Silver flow the streams from Kelos to Eruri, in the green fields of Lebanon. Tall grows the grass there, in the wind from the sea, the white lilies sway. And the golden bells are shaken, of Malos and Alfirin, in the green fields of Lebanon, in the wind from the sea. Green are those fields in the songs of my people, but they were dark then, grey wastes in the blackness before us. And over the wide land, trampling unheeded, the grass and the flowers, we hunted our foes through a day and a night, until we came, at the bitter end, to the great river at last. Then I thought in my heart that we drew near to the sea, for wide was the water in the darkness, and seabirds innumerable cried on its shores. Alas for the wailing of the gulls! Did not the lady tell me to beware of them? And now I cannot forget them.
Love that. That is fantastic. Well, we continue with the account of the days of riding, this time crossing Gilrine and scattering the foes before resting a bit. But Aragorn doesn't want to rest very long. He is in a hurry. And by the way, it's a good thing they didn't rest any longer. I mean, can you imagine? They show up at the battle an hour later. Éomer's already dead. The entire Rohirrim are wiped out. Good thing they moved on. Aragorn's in a hurry. He knows that Minas Tirith is under attack and that every moment counts. So they get on their horses and they head out before the dawn. So this is the day of the 12th of March.
That's right. But at this point in the story, Legolas pauses for a moment, goes all poetic.
Oh, he sure does. It's beautiful.
Lovely little bit of verse describing the region of Lebanon, in particular some of its flowers, those white lilies, the golden bells of Malos and Alfirin. Now, lilies, you all know. Malos and Alfirin, they're a bit different though, right? And Tolkien doesn't say any more about them, does he? Or doesn't he?
No, and we can't get those in our local florist shop. I mean, white lilies we can get. Tolkien does use Alfirin in the tale of Cirion and Eorl as another name for Silmarillion. But Christopher Tolkien believes that it's a different flower, even if Tolkien's given it the same name here. And I tend to agree. And so do Walter and Graham Judd, the authors of Flora of Middle-earth. They observed that the Alfirin Silmarillion has white star-like flowers that stand erect. Here we're clearly talking about sort of those nodding, bell-shaped golden yellow flowers. And again, that's going to be something we cover more in the P5. So stay tuned for that.
But Legolas talks a little bit more about the grassy fields of Lebanon, saying that they're green in his people's songs, but under the sunless sky, in these pre-dawn hours, they were dark.
Yeah.
He was quite stark as well when he described that. Like he was almost hurt or offended that they did not match how they were in his songs. You know, he was quite pointed in describing how they were not green.
Yeah.
And now, through a day and a night, they left in the early hours of the 12th of March, so they're going into the night of the 12th and 13th of March, reaching Pelargir on the 13th.
That is a long ride. I mean, they leave before dawn and they're riding well into the night, past midnight, so they don't arrive to Pelargir until the 13th. So we're talking probably 19, 20 hours on horseback. That's a long ride.
And again, interesting that we don't know how well the horses coped with this one, because I would imagine they're pretty struggling.
They probably are. I mean, they're special horses, no doubt about it, right? I mean, these are the horses of the Grey Company that we're talking about. So they're very special, but they're still horses. They've still got to have rest. They still got to have food. They still got to drink. Yeah. And
I think it's a slight surprise Tolkien doesn't make any reference to that at all, because actually elsewhere he's quite keen to mention about what happens with the horses.
Yeah, that's true.
Again, perhaps goes back to Tolkien's own nervousness about describing this scene and this passage. You know, he says how it was awkward. So maybe that's why
And he did have to shorten it a little bit too.
Yeah,
He
did
seems to have
Tolkien
done
rush
that.
through it? Did he just think to himself, this was too much detail? We can't be too sure. But one detail that Legolas picks up on was how wide the river was, even in the darkness, how wide the river was. And Legolas thought that they'd drawn near the sea. And of course, there was a sign for that. It was those seagulls, those gulls. And he cannot get them out of his mind.
They're so annoying, he just can't stop thinking about them.
I know how he feels. And it's no wonder that Galadriel warned him about the sounds of the seagulls. Again, that reference, we keep getting these references back to earlier parts of the story. This is another one back to Galadriel. Just useful how Tolkien does this. We know Tolkien gets criticised for having too many characters in his stories. Actually, he does a very good job of just not making too much of it, just subtly dropping them in there. This is a good example of actually, oh yes, I do remember reading that 3 books ago. I think he's done a really good job. But do you want to pick up on the last section of our readings, Alan?
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and tackle this. I'm going to set the stage because we're going to skip that first paragraph. They come upon battle in earnest, as Gimli puts it, as the Haradrim turn and get ready to fight. Oh, man. So Aragorn pulls out that ace card, right? He's ready. He's got the winning hand right here. And Gimli's telling the story, by the way. But Aragorn halted and cried with a great voice, "Now come, by the black stone I call you." And suddenly the shadow host that had hung back at the last came up like a grey tide, sweeping all away before it. Faint cries I heard, and dim horns blowing, and a murmur as of countless far voices. It was like the echo of some forgotten battle in the dark years long ago. Pale swords were drawn, but I know not whether their blades would still bite, for the dead needed no longer any weapon but fear. None would withstand them. To every ship they came that was drawn up, and then they passed over the water to those that were anchored, and all the mariners were filled with a madness of terror and leaped overboard, save the slaves chained to the oars. Reckless we rowed among our fleeing foes, driving them like leaves until we came to the shore. And then to each of the great ships that remained, Aragorn sent one of the Dunedain, and they comforted the captives that were aboard, and bade them put aside fear and be free. Ere that dark day ended, none of the enemy were left to resist us. All were drowned, or were flying south in the hope to find their own lands upon foot. Strange and wonderful I thought it that the designs of Mordor should be overthrown by such wraiths of fear and darkness. With its own weapons was it worsted. Strange indeed, said Legolas. In that hour I looked on Aragorn and thought how great and terrible a lord he might have become in the strength of his will, had he taken the ring to himself. Not for naught does Mordor fear him, but nobler is his spirit than the understanding of Sauron. For is he not of the children of Luthien? Never shall that line fail, though the years may lengthen beyond count. Beyond the eyes of the dwarves are such foretellings, said Gimli. But mighty indeed was Aragorn that day. Lo, all the Black Fleet was in his hands, and he chose the greatest ship to be his own, and he went up into it. Then he let sound a great concourse of trumpets taken from the enemy, and the shadow host withdrew to the shore. There they stood silent, hardly to be seen, save for a red gleam in their eyes that caught the glare of the ships that were burning. And Aragorn spoke in a loud voice to the dead men, crying, Hear now the words of the heir of Isildur. Your oath is fulfilled. Go back and trouble not the valleys ever again. Depart and be at rest. And thereupon the king of the dead stood out before the host, and broke his spear and cast it down. Then he bowed low and turned away, and swiftly the whole grey host drew off, and vanished like a mist that is driven back by a sudden wind, and it seemed to me that I awoke from a dream. And if I have to read another line of Gimli dialogue, my throat is going to leap out of my body. All right, let's go back to the beginning of that, Shawn.
Yeah, so in the part that we skipped, we get Gimli's first contribution to this retelling as he tells of the Battle of Pelargir. 50 ships, countless smaller boats.
That's right.
But some of the enemy had escaped, having run from the dead, and others had burned their ships, knowing that this army was coming to take them.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I don't know that I'd caught that in my first few readings, that they were burning their ships already. This was an invasion force, so of course, they knew. So the Haradrim, who we know from the Battle of the Pelennor chapter are fierce combatants, turned and faced them and laughed because of the comparative size of their forces. I love this, by the way. In the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, we get this line: the Southrons were bold men and grim and fierce in despair. And here they are described with those exact same words, fierce in despair.
Fierce in despair. Laugh all you want, but I've got an army of the dead.
Well, there you go. There you go. That's it. That's so, it's a game winner move. Just the Southrons are just going to have to rage quit now.
Yeah, it's just top trumps of armies, right? Army of the dead, I win.
Yep,
so Aragorn calls the Shadow Host over, and it is over.
That's right. That's right.
We get this phrase that we've looked at before. Pale swords were drawn, but I know not whether their blades would still bite. For the dead needed no longer any weapon but fear. None would withstand them.
That's right. What do you think, Shawn? We've talked about this before on the show, and I have my opinion, but I want to get yours. Could they have done physical damage? Not that they would ever need to, but could they have hurt or killed living beings with these pale swords? What do you think?
It's difficult because I also struggle to believe, going back to that previous passage, for the dead needed no longer any weapon but fear. I don't really believe that they scared everybody to death. Right? So I kind of struggle with that premise.
Okay.
That, we all know about ghosts, right? But it just feels slightly Scooby-Doo that they were going, woo, and everybody died, right? So
they run, right? They don't just like collapse and die from fear. They turn and run, and then they drown in the river, yeah.
But I don't think the swords would draw blood. But I wonder if their form, when it perhaps passes through, because presumably they weren't physically pushing into them, but they would be passing through beings, men. I wonder if there's some impact of that. I struggle to see that. We are told explicitly, I think, pretty much, fairly explicitly there, that the blades aren't working right. And we've got no description of wounds or blood or anything along those lines that indicates that the swords were actually doing damage. I wonder if their form is able to do that. Not too dissimilar, perhaps, from the faces in the Dead Marshes.
Maybe. But those we know were just visions. Those were just, they weren't. I don't know. This is an interesting one. I'm not even sure if they ever came into melee range of the Southrons. I mean, I think the Southrons saw this dead army and turn tail and run, trying to swim across the river, swim to whatever boats they can. I mean, they end up drowning, they end up dying, or they end up fleeing. I don't know if they got to the point where pale swords were going through bodies, but the one passage that we looked at and you weren't with me at the time, I think I was going through this chapter with Don Marshall, and we talked about the body of Baldur that they find in the Paths of the Dead. And we dug out that piece out of The Nature of Middle-earth where we read his enemy came up behind him and broke his legs. And, so we know that he just died there, unable to move, unable to get out and escape, but they had a physical effect on him. And you wonder if they could break his bones, then the dead could also have some sort of impact over the physical world. I don't know. It's an interesting thought, though. Interesting thought. All right. Well, let's move on. We're never going to answer that question, so fire away.
But regardless, there are even some of them that would rather jump overboard than even face the dead. And we had some slaves, and they were just as terrified. And, of course, they couldn't escape.
No, they're chained to the boats.
Literally chained to the boats. But, thankfully, their enemy was defeated, and the Dunedain went and comforted them and freed them all.
That's right. Now, by the way, just as a quick aside, the idea of ships driven by slaves chained to the boat, that is very, very commonplace, right? Hammond and Skull actually give us a little note on that. I want to share that with you. They say that large ships propelled primarily by oars, such as those of the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean, were often manned by slaves or prisoners or convicted criminals, secured to rowing benches by a fetter around the ankle. So freeing them certainly seems like a very Aragorn-like thing to do.
But Gimli sums it all up by pointing out that every last enemy was dead or fleeing, and saying something that we've seen more than once. The designs of Mordor worsted by its own weapons.
I love that. I love that.
That weird, almost Schadenfreude satisfaction there. Ah, ha, 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 Mordor. We managed to turn it against you.
Hoisted on their own petard. Yeah.
But Legolas also had a realization. He thought to himself, and it's not often we hear these kind of thoughts from the characters at all. He realized just how great and terrible Aragorn would have been had he claimed the ring for himself.
He absolutely would be. Aragorn as the Lord of the Rings, as the one holding the one. I mean, for that reason alone, Sauron should be afraid of him, right? That's what Legolas says, right? Not for naught does he fear him. I love the way he concludes that, though. He is far nobler. He is of the line of Luthien. And that, wow, that is so strong. It brings us right back actually to something we just talked about in the Houses of Healing, that it is not just that Aragorn is the king that gives him healing hands. It's that he's a descendant of Luthien that gives him healing hands, but that is what entitles him to be the king. If somebody else managed to be king somehow, if Gondor went away from just having kings of that line, they wouldn't have the hands of a healer, because it's his descent from Luthien that makes him that. And it's what he meant when he referred to Elrond back then as the eldest of our race. But man, this line of Luthien thing is great.
It is, but it is an interesting thought experiment, isn't it? We often talk about what would happen if Gandalf took the ring, if Frodo hadn't destroyed it and kept hold of it, if Sauron had got it back. It's not so often we wonder what would have happened if Aragorn had taken it, because, of course, we know that he didn't. He knew his own weakness.
Yep.
Declined the opportunity, even though he could have taken it, but didn't. You have to wonder how resilient he would have been, because actually we have a piece of evidence, of course, with Aragorn and the Palantir. Yeah, right? He was far more resilient actually in facing Sauron directly than perhaps others would have given him credit.
At the same time, that's because he's the owner, the authorized user of the Palantir, right? And he wouldn't be the owner or authorized user of the ring. I don't know. It's an interesting question. You're right. I don't think any mortal could possibly wear it without being completely succumbed.
No. But of course, as the heir of Isildur, he could claim some sense of ownership of the ring.
That's true. It was taken as weregild, yeah.
I agree with you that I don't think any mortal could ultimately survive its effects. But I wonder for how long he could resist. How long could it go on for? And actually, in a war scenario, how long would you need to go on for? You wouldn't need to go on for years. Interesting whether he could actually have bent the ring to his will to an extent at first. Because, of course, no one actually did that apart from Sauron, right? Nobody actually used the ring for any purpose other than being invisible, right? So nobody actually...
Right. And that was more of a side effect than a purpose, right? I mean,
exactly. Yeah. Apart from Bilbo, who likes going invisible. But
before he knew what it was.
Could he actually have attempted to master the ring before it would have taken him over? I don't know. But it's an interesting one that I'm going to think a little bit more about.
I will too. It's a good one.
Anyway, Gimli also agrees with Legolas about Aragorn's might, describing the next steps.
That's right.
He picks the best ship.
Because of course he does. He's the king.
Of course. Yeah. Why wouldn't you? Blows trumpets taken from the enemy.
I love that.
And the shadow host withdrew back to the shore. They can hardly be seen, just a red gleam in their eyes reflecting the burning ships.
Oh, that's a terrifying vision, isn't it? So Aragorn at this moment frees them, right? I'm thinking of Gimli's line from the movies. They're awfully handy to have around, But he frees them. He holds their oath fulfilled. And that just takes me back to some of those moments, especially in the drafts of the passing of the Great Company when they talk about the dead. That bit about how they would sometimes gather around the stone of Erech and basically, we want to fulfill our oath and the sorrow and regret that they were filled with. And here they finally get that peace. It's beautiful. They get what they're supposed to get, right? They were intended to never have to stay in the world this long. They get the gift of men finally. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another good example of us seeing the difference between elves and men. They are weary of the world, but weary because they've lived well beyond the length of years they should have done. They want this to all be over. And actually that that sense of the way it's described that the King of the Dead, breaks his spear, bows, turns, and they just disappear. Almost you can sense that relief from them. It is over.
Oh, yeah.
It is over.
Absolutely. Their spirits have been here for far too long, right? Think of one of the other, we mentioned earlier, the names the elves come up with for people, how they're kind of insulting. One of their names for men is the guests.
Yes.
They're not supposed to still be here. These are guests who have overstayed their welcome. Their bodies are long dead and these spirits are still roaming and haunting the mountains. They want to get out of here. They're not supposed to be here anymore.
The other thing I thought was quite interesting about them was the reflection.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's ever occurred to me before, the fact that although, they're not physically corporeal in the sense that we would know, but their eyes have the capacity to reflect.
Yeah.
Which maybe makes me reassess my answer I gave before about their swords, potentially.
Maybe
makes me think that there is actually a stronger substance.
Some sort of physical presence. Yeah.
More of a substance to them than I appreciated beforehand.
Interesting.
And so we conclude the passage with Gimli says he feels like he's just woken up from a dream.
Yeah. It would be weird, right? I mean, he almost, that whole time from through the Paths of the Dead through now, Gimli has really felt like he's somewhere else. This is just so otherworldly for him. So yeah, now it's like waking up, and now it's time to get to action for him, right? It's time to start getting to the fight. So when the King of the Dead stood out before the host and broke his spear and cast it down, I'm fairly sure I saw a ghostly Barlaman cast down his mailbag as well. Yeah. So what does Barlaman have in the bag for us tonight, Shawn?
Well, Christopher A. writes in asking for our opinion on the new video game set in Middle-earth, Gollum.
Oh boy. Alan,
have you played it?
Played implies at least a minimum level of fun. It's more accurate to say that I launched the game and operated it for 3 to 4 hours. It was a genuine attempt to create a story-driven, relatively lore-faithful story about a character who's really often misunderstood. It is clear that the creators, or at least somebody in the process, read the works. A lot of subtle references, things that only a fan would get. A lot of like, oh man, they really get the lore here. But I'm not sure they realized that it wouldn't make for much of a game. It really was just not fun. Let me give you some positives. The positives, there were some. The Gollum versus Smeagol game dynamic where you would make choices and try to argue. Smeagol would try to persuade Gollum or Gollum would try to persuade Smeagol. It was kind of cool. There was a unique visual spin on the characters that we know well. There was a very different looking Mouth of Sauron, a different Gandalf, a different Elven King. It was definitely faithful to the lore in many places. The music was very good. I actually listened to the soundtrack some. And there was a really cool sighting of Grond under construction around the 2-hour mark. That was a lot of fun to see. The negatives, level design, gameplay, user interface, level design, gameplay. It was buggy, dark, muddy graphics, textures that look like they belong on a game from 10 years ago. Level design and gameplay. I might have repeated myself there. It was pretty rough in spots. I mean, really, really rough. Here's the thing. Look, Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War may have been absolutely bonkers in terms of lore, especially Shadow of War with the whole sexy Shelob and Isildur and Helmhammer and his Nazgul. It was way over the top nuts. But at least they were fun games. They were fun to play. It was like Assassin's Creed Mordor, they were just enjoyable. They brought people into the Tolkien fandom. This tepid pile of code is not fun at all. And if this is somebody's first experience with Tolkien, they're not going to want to come back. It's just not a fun game.
Yeah, so I've also played the game. I'm somebody who plays games regularly. I've got a Switch at home. I thought it was pants, frankly. That's a technical term.
I was trying to get myself hydrated after all those long readings. You just about got a spit take out of me, sir. It was pants. Yeah, that's about right.
So for me, there's a couple of things here. So one of them is the studio is better than this, right? And I don't understand why they've produced this level of game.
Yeah, they really are.
They must know this is rubbish, and I'm surprised. And actually, I think it was quite embarrassing. They put out a statement to say, yeah, we know you'll hate the game, right? And that was a bit of a surprise. For me, this looked like a pretty shameless and cheap attempt to cash in on Tolkien. It clearly, the graphics, as you say, they are rubbish. And I would go further, they look more than 10 years ago. It just looks rubbish. And on top of that, they were trying, if you recall, they were trying to rush the release originally for September when the Rings of Power were coming out. I had actually said on Twitter publicly that I thought that was a poor move on their part, because they were obviously trying to ride off the back of the Rings of Power, and they realised that they couldn't get the game done in time. The biggest problem I had with it all, so I agree, it was buggy, gameplay was rubbish, it looks hideous, right? It's just really
does. I mean, I've got an RTX 3080 and I'm running it at the highest possible resolution on a 38-inch wide monitor, and it's like, wow, this is not good.
It is so bland. That's my takeaway for it. It's just grey constantly, and Gollum looks like it looks like a baby that's been sitting under a sunbed. He's just constantly. He's kind of got.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
He's got this weird kind of shininess to him constantly.
Yeah.
It's really peculiar. So there's that. But
it is.
There was a bigger problem, and it's about gameplay. I just didn't care about the game. I just didn't care about. I had no. Yes, the Smeagol Gollum thing was fun, but actually, I was just once you've done it a couple of times, you're like, all right, then.
Yeah, that's true. I think, for me, the gameplay it looked like an open world game, but it wasn't because you had to go on this one path. You had to find the one path that they designed for you, and you had to do it the way they wanted. You couldn't even take out orcs because they would always put helmets on the orcs, and you could only throttle the non-helmeted orcs. In the 4 hours of gameplay, I killed a whopping 2 orcs. There's no leveling up. There's no progress. There's no new skills. It grinds and it grinds and it grinds. And it's a real shame because that's a good studio. They do point and click adventures like nobody's business. They are fantastic at those. And it breaks my, and I have to tell you one other thing. Somebody even in the marketing department knew the lore, because me and some of the others who'd got advanced copies of the code because we were going to be doing, streaming. They wanted to encourage us to do streams and stuff. I got this really cool wooden box, and in it included a leather map with the ring verse on the back. And it was just this gorgeous thing. And there was a little pouch, and in the pouch was stuff exactly out of what is supposedly in Gollum's pouch in The Hobbit. Fish bones, an old stone to sharpen knives, I think a goblin tooth or something. And I mean, all of those little things were in there. And it was just this nod and like, hey, fan, we know you know the stuff. Now we know the stuff. Here are these really cool little, tokens of our appreciation. And it's sad because maybe if you just put a little more effort into the game, I mean, man, just disappointing.
So,
but
for me, I think it's depends on how you look at it, underestimation or overestimation of the Tolkien fandom.
Actually, a little bit.
That actually you can just put this. I mean, this would have gone through QA testing and everything. They must have known.
They had to have known
this wasn't going to live up to it. And there were many of us that saw the trailers and thought this doesn't look that great.
Yeah.
And in fact, the trailers themselves, if you go back to them, when big games come out, right, you see loads of video clips of those games before they're released. We actually didn't see that much of Gollum at all before it came out. Again, perhaps a sign that they knew this wasn't functioning at the level it should have been functioning at. I can't work out why either they didn't spend more time on it or they didn't kill it off internally, because that's the bit that I struggle with. But it feels like they just thought they could chuck it out there and Tolkien fans would eat it up. I mean, when it first,
and spend an extra $20 on the Cinderin pack. Yeah. It did feel a little. And I don't blame Daedalic for that. That's more of the publisher. I don't remember who the publisher is. Daedalic's the studio that made it. But yeah, the publisher, I think, had a lot to do with getting the timeline out. That always happens. The publishers push the developers, and the developers don't have time. It's a real shame, but still, in the end, it's a big blight on Middle Earth gaming for sure. I mean, I don't think they can fix it the way that they would like to, because it's broken to its core. I'm thinking of, there was another game a few years ago, totally not Middle Earth related, and I won't go too far on this, but No Man's Sky came out and was a total bomb because everybody had expected it to be this fantastic game. And here's what happened with that studio. They fixed it. They've taken the last few years and turned it into an amazing game, because at its core, it wasn't entirely terrible. It was just the execution of it was really poor, and there was nothing in it. There was no content.
I was going to say the issue with No Man's Sky at the beginning was the concept was fine. It was empty, right?
Exactly. And they have fleshed that out, and they have fixed things. The developer has really gotten behind it to turn it into an amazing game. I don't think there's anything that Daedalus can do here to turn Gollum into a great game, because the entire concept from the beginning is bad.
The bit that concerns me is this is shoddy. It is shoddy pants.
Yep.
How much does that, first of all, reflect Tolkien fandom? Right. I don't want people to think badly of Tolkien because I had a shoddy game.
Yep.
There's another thing, which is you don't want other developers. We know we've got more games coming. We don't want them to think this is the bar. Right, so long as I do better than this bar, there are other gaming franchises where you take as an example Grand Theft Auto. The bar is really high, really, really high, and every time they do a new game, they have to hit that high bar. Yep. There are some gaming franchises where the bar is much lower, and they think I just have to do my annual update to my game and hit my bar
Call of Duty.
Yeah, right, and you just got to put it out. I don't want anybody else to think this is the bar for Tolkien fans or Tolkien adaptation.
No.
I just don't think we deserve much better quality than this. And you're right, there are some really successful Middle-earth games. Obviously Lord of the Rings Online, massively successful.
Yep. Even though its graphics are pants, the game is fantastic.
Its graphics are pants, but it's fantastic. For me, my favourite game has always been Battle for Middle-earth 2.
Yeah.
I thought that was
fantastic
fantastic.
Game.
Brilliant. I spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on that.
Mm-hmm.
There was also some of the ones, for those of you who can go back about 20 years, Two Towers, Return of the King, and Third Age. Those games.
Third Age. I love Third Age. That was a great one.
They came out on GameCube, PlayStation 2, Xbox back in the day.
Yep.
Those were pretty well received as well. So it's not like Middle-earth can't work in a video game. It's just actually... I think probably the problem here was the mechanics of Gollum. You don't care about it. I had no desire to make him succeed. I didn't really feel like I really want to get to the end. That's what keeps people playing a game, right? Is you think I've got to win. I've got to get to the end of this. I didn't care at all. No. That was the bit that went wrong.
I did kept moaning and groaning about the fact that why am I still in the dungeons of Barad-dûr after 4 hours of gameplay? It's ridiculous. Get me out of here. Yeah. Anyway.
So I think Christopher A. Alan and I loved the game.
Yep.
But Alan, have we got time for one more question?
It's going to have to be brief now. Jesse P. asked us this one a long time ago. If the pull to the west and the desire to cross the sea to Valinor became stronger as elves get older, what about elves who were born in the Third Age? Possibly late into the Third Age. Elves were still reproducing, correct? Do we know anything about elvish children, or especially young elves who happen to be born very late into the age of the world, yet came alive at a time very close to when all elves would soon be departing Middle-earth? Would they have felt the same pull, or maybe just have gone along with their people because that's what their race was doing?
First of all, are we talking about elven reproduction? Because I thought
we are.
This was a family show. but I think that desire to sail west seems to be a collective feeling.
Yeah.
It's a compulsion more than a choice, and Legolas actually in the passage we were just hearing made that clear. Once you hear it, you hear it. But it's just a question of when the elves give in to that compulsion.
Yeah.
All elves ran the risk of fading, which is, we generally believe means that their spirit becomes separated from their body in Middle-earth. And going to Valinor offers them an opportunity to prevent that, protection against it.
Right.
Now, of course, if only there was a way to stay in Middle-earth and slow or stop that fading, hence the creation of the rings.
Exactly.
With the One Ring destroyed, all elves now ran that risk again of growing world-weary and fading. And as this is collective in all elves, this would be in younger elves too, even if it was less strong and less immediate a compulsion when they were younger. But it would still be there. And of course, Legolas, in the grand scheme of Middle-earth and Arda, was relatively young when he sailed west.
That's true. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he was, a third age elf. I mean, we don't know that Legolas was young, and we certainly don't know exactly how young he was. We're never given his birth date, but it sure seems to be the case. I've got some basis for that, right? I mean, first of all, he's never been to Lothlorien before, despite it being like next door. He talks about Amroth as somebody he's heard about in song, not somebody he knew.
Mm.
Now, at the same time, he's not young either, right? I mean, he talks about traveling with a 139-year-old dwarf and an 88-year-old man and how that makes him feel old by comparison. So clearly he's older than that. I don't know. That the sea longing, though, I think you said that it is a compulsion and not a choice. I really like that language. It is very much inherent in the nature of the elves. It's not that it, and I kind of want to go back to the question itself on this one. Jesse asks about if it becomes stronger as elves get older. I don't think it's related to the age of the individual elf. I think it's more about as the ages progress, as the elves as a race get older, that drawing is stronger. And it's more related to that. And I want to get a quote in here that talks about the call. I think this is really relevant, and it also is beautiful. So frankly, I'm going to read it. Ulmo loves both elves and men and never abandoned them, not even when they lay into the wrath of the Valar. At times he will come unseen to the shores of Middle-earth or pass far inland up firths of the sea and there make music upon his great horns, the Ulumuri, that are wrought of white shell. And those to whom that music comes hear it ever after in their hearts, and longing for the sea never leaves them again. Now, frankly, I don't think the Ulumuri sound like seagulls. That's just my opinion. I think they sound a lot less annoying, but they are beautiful, I am sure. And I get the feeling that with the elves, that sound grows louder in their minds. That sound of the Ulumuri, that longing for the sea, and it's not the individual age, but it's instead the passing of the ages themselves.
Yeah, and I think by the time we get to the end of the third age, destruction of the ring, we move into the fourth age, that's clearly there for all elves, right? That sense that they need to leave now. Or you mentioned about how young Legolas was. Now, it's worth remembering that we know that young adults and children can sail west. Now, Elwing,
true, she
was admittedly half elven, but when she sailed/flew west, she was aged just 35. Right? Admittedly, it wasn't from a sea longing, but she did go west.
True. It was for an Eärendil longing. Yeah.
The other thing I've sometimes seen this online is that sailing west doesn't prevent aging.
No, it does not.
Because I think some people think when a child sails west, they are frozen. They're not frozen. You still age. And actually,
and if you're immortal, you still die. I mean, Frodo dies over there, folks. That's how it goes.
And we presume that Gimli and Bilbo do as well. Although we're not told explicitly about it.
No,
but
Sam as well. Yeah. In fact, there are things in the letters that make you think that they actually die faster, like a moth in a flame. That there's a brightness to the land that causes them to reach their end sooner. Anyway, continue. I'm sorry. I think I interrupted you.
Well, I was going to say that for anybody interested in the aging of the elves and of men, I'd recommend both Morgoth's Ring
Yep.
and The Nature of Middle-earth.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
For everything to do with the aging of elves and what that means, those are the two books you really need to take a look at, because that help you to learn a little bit more about Tolkien's thoughts on these metaphysical questions.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. 100%. I'm so glad that Nature of Middle-earth came out, because it does add so much more to the conversation. Morgoth's Ring is definitely worth the read for that as well. Folks, that does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. Come back again next week when Shawn and I take counsel together with Gandalf, Aragorn, and the Sons of Elrond.
Yeah, I'll just volunteer to stay in Minas Tirith and help Yorith out or something.
There you go. Yeah, I'm sure she needs something. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And folks, Alan and I want to thank the members of Team PPP, editor Jordan Rennells, Barliman Becca Davis, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, graphic artist Megan Collins, and website guru Phil Dean.
Speaking of the website, please be sure to give us a visit there at theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got our show notes. We've got some pretty funny outtakes going on. Our Prancing Pony Ponderings. One of these days, I'll update a few. Our online storefront, where you can get all sorts of PPP merch. And that includes the new chapter art from Megan this season.
And you're also going to want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony podcast is first and foremost a podcast about the books. So if you're interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, such as Morgoth's Ring or The Nature of Middle-earth, you'll find a link for it in our library. The PPP gets a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase, and we thank you for that.
Indeed we do. We also want to thank our patrons at the Círdan's contribution tier. I'll start with DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Ned from Connecticut, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, and Dylan in Australia.
And there's also some more thanks for Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, Zaxu in Illinois, Brian in Texas, Sarah in New Jersey, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, Connor in North Carolina, Erica in Texas, Carson in Oklahoma, Keith in Alabama, Vivian in California, James in Massachusetts, Anne in Kentucky, Shaun in New Jersey, Mason in California, and Maureen in Massachusetts. Thank you all so very, very much for your support.
Indeed, thank you.
And make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. You can subscribe now through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favourite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and, well, most of all, what you're going to do about the sea longing to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And if you want your voice literally heard, just send us audio of your question. You can visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us.
Please be sure to still email the question to Barliman. Even though Barliman's been a lot more reliable lately, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able.
Indeed, we will. As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Bye for now.